Well, this is about 12 o'clock in the day. You can see the wave behind me is about 6 foot high. This was about 25 knots of wind. By the time I got to 11 o'clock that night, I'd been paddling for 15 hours. It was pitch black. The wind had increased to about 40 knots, which is one down from a category 1 hurricane. I got hit by a wave that I didn't even see coming. It knocked me completely overboard in the pitch black. Thank goodness I had my emergency tether attached to my craft, and I got dragged over the side of the craft. I pulled myself back on board, and I realized it was too dangerous to be out there in the middle of these terrifying conditions. So I got into my tiny little cabin and I locked myself in, but before I did that, I put out what's called a parachute anchor, which goes out the front of the craft, and I get dragged with the conditions to stabilize me somewhat so I don't get rolled over during the night. And as I was trying to just survive until the morning and hopefully not get rolled upside down too many times during the night as I'm bracing inside my craft for what seemed like forever. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, everything started to change and feel very, very strange, and I was starting to get pulled through the top of these giant waves. The waves had increased to 5 meters, and through my tiny little cabin I could see my craft's nose of the craft getting pulled through and down into and through these waves, which shouldn't really be happening. I took a look on my little instrument chart plotter, which told me something that shouldn't really be happening. Normally I'd get dragged with the conditions and with the sea state and with the wind, but my chart plotter, my little instruments were telling me that I was getting dragged forward through the conditions, into the conditions, which shouldn't be possible, which means that something was pulling me. I narrowed it down to the only thing that I could think it could possibly be, and there were only 2 things that I thought it could possibly be, and the only way I could rectify that was to get on the phone with a satellite phone to confirm with my weather routing agent what it could possibly be, because what I was thinking was so far-fetched that I needed someone to confirm it with me. About 5 minutes later, I got the most terrifying digital message across a satellite phone that I've ever got in my entire life, which confirmed exactly what I was thinking. The message read like this: Chris, you either got a giant whale or a giant squid caught on your parachute anchor, which is trying to escape and go down into the ocean. I suggest you take immediate action and cut yourself off this creature before it drags you and the craft down with it. Like, I had prepared for everything on my journey, but I hadn't really prepared to have a giant squid stuck in my parachute anchor that was trying to drag me and my craft down through the most terrifying conditions. I got into all my safety gear and I managed to unlock my cabin, get outside. I got my special knife that I have to be able to cut the line which would separate the parachute anchor so the creature could escape and wouldn't drag me down with it. And as I cut the line, I didn't realize how much load was on that line. And when I cut it, the craft spun sideways because the other line that goes to the back of the parachute anchor is attached to the stern of the craft, and it pulled the craft suddenly sideways and rolled it. This is the middle of the storm at 2 o'clock in the morning in howling wind. I ended up getting thrown overboard, wrapped over the side of the craft as it was rolling in the middle of the night of the storm. Now I'm underneath the craft in the pitch black in the middle of the storm with this creature outside. I mean, if I could have trained it to pull me in the right direction, or maybe harvested for calamari, that would have been great, but unfortunately I wasn't able to do that, and I was just trying to get free. And as I cut the only line that was holding me underneath the water against the craft, I cut the line, and as I cut the line, I heard the line go bzzz, which was the line cutting through my finger, and I actually thought my finger had been ripped off. And as I came back up and I put my hands on the side of the craft, I remember looking down to see if my finger was still attached, and thank goodness it still was, but there was really blood coming out of my gloves. And I realized that I needed to just survive through the night, but at least I got the creature out of my parachute anchor and I could proceed forward. And for the next 4 hours, I was just trying to survive until daylight. And when I got through to daylight, I remember looking at my finger and realizing that I could nurse it back to health over a little bit of time if I just managed it correctly. And then I went outside and I realized that my main steering system had been ripped off my deck of my craft by a giant wave in the night, and now I had no steering. And I thought that things couldn't really get any worse, and that's when I got pushed into the shipping lanes. And a lot of people always ask me, what is it like out there? Did I see any ships? Well, I think this is a really good example of, yes, I saw a whole lot of ships. If you see in the picture behind me on my right-hand side at the top, the little black item over there with a red ring around it is my little craft. And every single one of those little blue items are super tankers coming at me from every single direction, all within a 5-mile radius of me trying to run me flat. And if you think that's not terrifying, I think my swim to watch gives you a really good example of how terrifying it is, because it shows you that my resting heart rate was 59 when I was paddling. Normally it was 107, and every single one of those 5 little spikes in green is a different super tanker through the night that I thought was going to run me flat, where my heart rate went up to over 208, which is 1 down from a full-blown cardiac arrest. So yes, it was reasonably stressful. I managed to get through the Canary Islands and get out into the middle of the Atlantic, and I was just happy to find solutions to most of the situations that were happening and unfolding around me. And I got through to Christmas Day. And mostly, for most people sitting here today, Christmas Day is normally a really good day, where you're celebrating with your friends and family and you're eating roast duck or turkey or whatever it is. Unfortunately, that was not my day. I had a really bad day on Christmas. I was sitting in my tiny little craft, and I was absolutely I was just drained physically, mentally, and emotionally. I'd been pushing it for the last 2 weeks straight, and my body was destroyed. And I remember picking up my same freeze-dried food packet, which was the same ingredients that I'd had for the last 25 days, every single day, the same freeze-dried food packet. And as I looked at it, I lost my appetite. And as I was getting upset with all the things that were going on, and thinking of my friends and family that were having Christmas dinner back home, and thinking what a really stupid idea it was to paddle across the Atlantic Ocean, I realized that my craft was listing sideways, and I had a leak, and I was actually slowly sinking. And I caught myself getting really down and depressed about it, and I started getting really emotional. And I had to catch myself in that moment and think of how bad things were. Because yes, they were bad, but they could be worse. They could always be worse. And I started thinking of all the little kids that I was doing this for, and that they don't even have a face that's put together properly. And I started to think of having an attitude of gratitude for all the things we do have and we take for granted, and not focusing on the negative things. And in that moment I had a revelation, and I thought to myself, shut up, suck it up, get up, stand up, make the change, and be the change you want to see in the world today. Things can always be a whole lot worse, so focus on the positives. So I put my little Christmas hat on, I put a smile on my face, I put some old school In Excess music on, and I got out there and I just focused on just one stroke at a time, one session at a time, for as long as it takes, until I get there. And that day became a very pivotal moment for me and helped me really get through the next couple of weeks and the next month. And I really needed to have the right sort of attitude to be able to get through this kind of state and these kind of really big challenges. Because the next day, the next morning, I needed to have my A game on. Because I was making my water on my little water maker on my deck of my tiny little craft, and I was watching it going in drip by drip by drip. And that's when I saw it. This thing came up at such speed that everything went into slow motion. And when it hit the side of the craft, that's when I realized what it was. This thing hit me so hard that it knocked the side of my craft up, and I almost fell over into it. The head came out of the water, and I just saw this big black eye. It was a giant great white shark, and I just got knocked off balance. I managed to pull myself back onto balance as this head went straight underneath the water, and it started swimming underneath my craft. And that's when I realized how wide it was and how long it was, and it started swimming away, and then it turned around about 50 meters away, and it turned around and came straight back at me like a Scud missile. And by the time it came back at me, it makes you realize how completely vulnerable and alone you are out there when you're thousands of miles from any other help or any other human, and you have this thing coming at you at speed. It's like a bus with teeth that will not stop. And it came straight back at me. I thought it was going to take a giant bite out of the side of my craft, and I had my deck knife out, and I was ready to go into battle. I still had no idea what I was going to do, but I was ready anyway. And as we got to about 2 feet in front of me, it splashed, made a big splash. I thought it was going to bite the side of the craft, and then it steered off, and it swam away. But it took me about 25 minutes to stop shaking from the fear and to be able to put down that knife. And thank goodness, I'm not sure if it was because of my pirate-looking beard at the time, but he never came back. And I was very fortunate, it really rattled me mentally just to be able to get through that, because there was another experience that happened similarly about 24 hours later. But the next morning, thank goodness, when I woke up for my 4 o'clock shift, I was greeted by this guy, Mr. Wings, the flying fish, who had landed on the deck of my craft during the night. And unfortunately for Mr. Wings, he was dead. But as you can see, he gave me an immense amount of joy. And during that really difficult and challenging time, I needed that upliftment as much as possible. Mr. Wings, the flying fish, was obviously dead by the time I found him, but as you can see, he gave me huge amounts of joy. I put his little wings out. I made him fly around like an airplane for a while. Then I duct taped him onto my hat for a while. Then I stuffed him in my board shorts and paddled there for a while. Then obviously at lunch, well, I got hungry, so I ate him. Oh, I don't know what you're worried about. It was the tastiest morsel that I'd had on the whole journey. But what it taught me was, in that moment, was you've got to celebrate the small things. Celebrate your small victories, because even if you have to fake it to make it, you've got to keep yourself positive no matter what you can do to be able to get through these difficult times. And a lot of people thought that I'd get lonely out there, and I was out there by myself for months on end. But I never got lonely because there was so much that I needed to innovate and fix and find solutions to most of the time. And even though I was away from my family and friends, I created this own little ocean family. I saw dolphins, I saw whales, and then within the first couple of weeks, I bumped into this amazing little creature. I met him the first time when I dived underneath the craft to scrape all the barnacles off the craft, and I bumped into him, and I got a bit of a fright. And then the next week when I swam down underneath my craft again, I bumped into him again, and then he invited some of his friends. But the amazing thing about him is he became my greatest companion on my entire journey. So I'd like to welcome you to Mr. Stripe, the pine fish. Mr. Stripe became my greatest companion, and he ended up swimming across the entire Atlantic Ocean with me, even after the first great white shark, the second great white shark experience. And that's a definition of friendship that I'm really not able to describe in length to you, but he became an incredible companion on my journey. And it was only when I got to the last stage of my journey, I got caught in this massive storm for the last week that I was out there. The wind was in the 35 to 45 to 50 knot range. The sea state, as you can see behind me, was absolutely terrifying. Through the day, through the night, and I had to navigate with a single paddle to try and find an island which is 20 kilometers wide, over 7,500 kilometers across the ocean, like a pinpoint. And I knew that when the storm changed, I needed to navigate my way to be able to get to this location, and if I had missed it, the closest form of land was, well, it was Venezuela. And I didn't have a visa for Venezuela. I also didn't have enough food to be able to get me there. But as I got to this point of this journey, this is actually the first picture that was taken as I was coming in about 3 miles out of Antigua. And it was a super emotional experience for my brothers and my team that came out on the only craft that could come out in this wild conditions to see me coming in. But for me I was just super focused, because I didn't want the headlines to be, man almost crosses the Atlantic Ocean with a stand-up paddleboard and gets shipwrecked on the side of the island. So I was super focused to just try and make it into the lee of the island to get into the protection of where I could finish this monumental journey. And as I came in there, this was actually the first picture that was taken, and it just was super emotional for everybody that was involved, because it was the first time anyone had actually seen what I'd been doing and what I'd been experiencing out there alone for over 93 days straight. And when I got into the lee of the island and I pulled that flare to signify the end of this incredible monumental journey, with framed around the background with the what's called the Pillars of Hercules, the cliffs behind me, I realized in that moment that I'd used my passion to be able to fulfill my purpose, and by doing that, I was able to change the lives of over hundreds of thousands of kids in Africa. And we raised enough money to be able to paid for over 1,000 operations and feed over 200,000 kids in Africa. And it was like the weight of that, those little kids stepping off my shoulders when I actually finished this journey. And Operation Smile put together a really nice little video that gives you an idea of how powerful this journey really was. So enjoy.